This is On Target St. John's, a look at politics, crime, education. What's happening here with the people who know. The views and opinions expressed on this program are not necessarily those of this station. Now, your On Target St. John's host, Linda Swain.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, the Santa Claus parade was on the go yesterday in St. John's, and nothing gets you in the Christmas spirit more than seeing the big stick walking up Water Street West. That was my situation yesterday, and that of many others. It's a bit of a cultural phenomenon here in Newfoundland and Labrador, but there you have it. It's not Christmas till you see the big stick. Well, with that, I notice a lot more people have their homes decorated now, and this, we're really kicking into the holiday season. And there's lots to be excited about, and there's a few things to be, it does concern some people. There are a variety of stresses that come with the holiday season, and it seems to be getting longer and longer every year. In to talk a little bit about that is Dr. Janine Hubbard with the Psychiatry Association. Hello.
Psychology
Association. Ooh, I'm sorry. All the psychiatrists out there just slammed down their phones or something. I don't know. But anyway, there we go. Psychology Association. Hello.
Hello.
Is it too early to say Merry Christmas?
No, I figure we're at the 1 month mark. We're good now. Some people like to wait for the 1st of December. I'm okay with the 1 month.
So the Psychology Association has put out some, tips regarding the holiday season and how to try to eliminate that stress from your life, that unnecessary stress, if you will. And Stella Circle recently had a session where they spoke to women about that very same thing. I was talking to somebody, funny, we mention all of this now, but I was talking to somebody about something completely unrelated. And all of a sudden she said, I got to go home now and start baking cookies. Not related to anything about Christmas, but all of a sudden she has to start her Christmas baking. So the stresses are there.
They are indeed. And we are our own worst enemies when it comes to this season and what we put upon ourselves. And I'm hoping, especially if we're starting this discussion early this year, that we can remind people to kind of take a step back, gain some perspective. Remember, what is it that we're trying to celebrate here? What is it that is important to us? And what are we just driving ourselves crazy with for absolutely no reason?
Well, that's right. And one of the first things that the Psychology Association has put out there is to check your expectations. What do you mean by that exactly?
That's probably the biggest piece of advice I can give, is in terms of your expectations of yourself as well as your expectations of others. In terms of expectations of yourself, we get caught up in whether you call it the Hallmark movie effect or the Pinterest effect. We have this completely unrealistic idea as to what the perfect Christmas dinner is going to look like, what the perfect Christmas day is going to be, all of the things that are going to happen over the holidays. And that's Hollywood. There's a reason, and Photoshop, and there's a reason these things don't actually exist in real life. And we need to keep reminding ourselves that that is a Hollywood artificial and that it's an unrealistic aspiration to reach for. So kind of taking a look and saying, what am I really hoping for in terms of, is it that I want the picture perfect holiday meal, or do I want people to feel well fed and loved and, feel that they've enjoyed themselves? Same thing in terms of expectations of others. Listen, if you have never once gotten along with your Uncle Albert, why do you suddenly think that the two of you are going to agree on Christmas Day at dinner, especially after there have been a couple of beverages? Same thing. If you have kids who have trouble sitting still for more than 10 minutes at a time, why do you think that they're going to sit still for the church pageant or the Christmas dinner? Or why do you think they're going to be able to sit through a long conversation with relatives? You have to remember that these are the same people that you deal with day in and day out. The things that you love about them will be the same over the holidays, and the things that drive you nuts aren't going to change just because it's the holidays.
Now, see, I'm motivated in a kind of a different way, or not very motivated, I guess. I'm a procrastinator. I put things off. What I find always happens is it's mid-December and I realize, I haven't put out any Christmas cards, or, I haven't actually sent the gifts that I'm supposed to be giving so-and-so over there, somewhere far away. I haven't put them in the mail. They're never going to get that for Christmas now. I'm that type of person. I'm not very organized, I guess. How do you keep the whip to people like someone like me?
Well, and maybe some of it is you're aware of your tendencies and you say, you know what? I have not managed to get that parcel in the mail on time for each of the last 5 years, and I've paid astronomical courier fees to make things happen. How be I send a gift card that they're able to open on their email on Christmas morning? Lots and lots of services offer that.
But that's not very personal.
Well, it can be, depending on where you're
it's
going
more
for it.
personal than not getting a parcel.
Well, there's that. And again, it also depends on who it's going to. If it's somebody, especially with little kids, who are going to be sorely disappointed if there isn't something to open up Christmas morning, that's one thing. You know, if it's a long-term friend or a relative who is like, I'm happy opening that January 7th, thank you very much. Don't worry about it. Don't stress about it. It's no big deal. But again, sometimes it's having that conversation even.
Thank God for the 12 days of Christmas is all I got to say. And it's a good thing my sisters understand me too. More is not always better.
No. And we, again, build up these expectations that we should, for example, give our kids every single thing that they're asking for. That's actually the worst possible thing you could do. One of the best things you can do in terms of child development and emotion regulation is to teach your kids that they have to cope with disappointment sometimes, that they are not going to get everything that they want. Even if they're really little and they have asked for such simple things that it's absolutely within your means to do so, they need to learn that not everything comes their way. It's a really important developmental life lesson, or you have them wind up in their 20s still thinking they're going to get everything that they want. And it's a really harsh blow to have hit later on in life.
What about that excess, we'll say? Some people are prone to putting pictures of the Christmas tree with the gifts going halfway out the room and covering up furniture and things for one or two children. Yeah. What about those, does social media exploit some of that, or where do you set those parameters?
And again, be very mindful of social media. And we'll probably talk a little bit about it more later in this hour. Social media isn't real. Social media reflects the perfect idealized presentation, and that may be reality for your family. Listen, I have relatives who literally every year do all of their practical shopping. They stock up on all the underwear and socks and tissue boxes, you name it, the practical stuff that they're going to need as a family. But they have fun and they wrap it up under the tree, and it just becomes a silly, fun event for them. It doesn't mean that it's actually crazy expensive. It's just that has become their tradition. But if you were to look at their tree, you would think, oh my goodness, this is, completely excessive. It's just in their case, that's what has worked for them as a tradition. One of the important messages I'd like to convey, and depending on who's out there listening, I have it on good faith from Santa, that Santa likes to bring small presents, and that larger presents, Santa would prefer that those come from parents. Because again, especially with social media, it can be very confusing to young kids as to, well, why did Santa bring me a sweater and a book, and Santa brought my classmate, a new gaming unit. That's a really hard inequity for a lot to understand. So just being mindful as to whose name is on each of the gifts in the household.
But do kids really keep track of that? You know what I'm saying? They know what they got. They know what they like the most. Yeah. That's the stuff that's going to stick in their minds. Are they going to remember who gave it to them? Because I know for certain I didn't always remember who gave it to me.
Some will, and especially in families where they may be struggling a little bit more, it can be really hard. Again, whether you see it on social media or whether you go back that first week of school and it's all what did Santa bring? And it can be really challenging and put a lot of extra pressure on a lot of parents.
Of course, the more expensive items usually come to kids who are older, so they don't believe in Santa anyway. So how do you square that?
That one may be a little bit easier to explain, but it's, again, trying to balance out what's important to your family, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but some years circumstances don't allow for the really plentiful holidays, and that's okay. But sometimes we need to be upfront about how we present that.
And of course, I'm not saying that Santa doesn't exist, because he totally exists. I'm just saying. I've seen him myself. I saw him this weekend.
You did?
Yeah. Christmas parade. He was there.
Yep.
He looked great. Make the most of obligations. We have a lot of obligations over Christmas.
We do. We have a lot of obligations, and we wear ourselves thin trying to meet a lot of those obligations.
We'll talk about that a little bit more right after this. And before the break, we were talking a little bit about some ways to reduce some of the stress that comes this time of year as we prepare for the holiday season. And just before the break, we were talking about making the most of obligations. What do you mean by that exactly?
Well, it's a tricky time of year, both in terms of your time obligations, but also some of your emotional obligations. It is lovely that everybody wants to throw a social event this time of year. And suddenly you're looking at your calendar. I mean, I'm looking at for the month of December and thinking, am I ever going to be home? If I was to accept every invitation, and I do, I feel this personal sense of obligation. Well, someone has reached out to me. They'd like my company. They'd like to, enjoy hanging out with me. But
and why wouldn't they?
Hey, I bring good cookies. But it's really hard to then balance I still have to sleep and eat and go to work and keep myself healthy. And at a certain point, do I stop enjoying activities because they feel like an obligation that I have to drag myself out to do rather than something I'm looking forward to? So sometimes it's looking at some of these and figuring out, well, are there some that I really do want to go to, some that I have to go to, and some that I might be able to say, you know what? I am just feeling really jam-packed. Could we book brunch together in January? I'd really like us to spend some one-on-one time or in a small group, but can we postpone some of that until January when things are a little bit calmer? And there's nothing wrong with doing that.
And of course, a lot of these get-togethers in Newfoundland and Labrador require a bit of travel. So there's that added, problem or time constraint.
Absolutely. And of course, let's not forget that it's usually a lousy time in terms of roads and weather and illness. And any of those can derail the best of plans. And it's leaving yourself some flexibility, leaving yourself a little bit of breathing room, remembering you still have to do laundry. You still have to do some of the practical things around the house. The other piece that we were just mentioning is more the emotional obligation. While we, again, go with the picture perfect version of everyone's delighted to get together over the holidays, that's not the reality for a lot of people, unfortunately. For some people, family is really tense. Perhaps there are really strained relationships. Maybe it's I only go home once a year because I know the dynamics are going to be really awkward. Figuring out how to take care of yourself. And some years that may mean putting up with the grief of, what do you mean you're not coming home for Christmas? If that's what you need to do to take care of your mental health and your mental well-being, make sure you're doing that. It's okay to be saying no, and it's also okay to be setting some boundaries. Maybe you go to an event, but you have given yourself an out. You've given yourself, it's a second activity I have to go to, or something so that you're making an appearance, but you're not going to let yourself get dragged down emotionally into a situation that isn't healthy for you.
You're mentioning these get-togethers and that, and one of the big get-togethers every year that a lot of adults participate in is the office Christmas party. Now, sometimes that's a great time and lots of fun had by all.
I was here one year, the morning after you guys had your Christmas party.
And sometimes it's fraught with some pretty serious difficulties. And I think every one of our listeners right now can remember a Christmas party that sort of went off the rails, if you will, or somebody ended up somewhere they weren't supposed to be, or saying things they weren't supposed to say, or doing what they shouldn't have been doing. How do we keep all that in check?
Again, it's the checking out your expectations, remembering that people are the same people out of the office as they are in the office. They just may perhaps have slightly lessened inhibitions. Be very careful. Remembering, listen, I love nothing more than getting together with coworkers, having a good time, having a good laugh, whether you're up dancing, whether you're having some drinks, whatever it is you're doing, but being really mindful that these are still the same people that you need to go to work with tomorrow. And so in some cases, maybe it's a buddy system. Maybe you're keeping an eye out for one of your friends. Maybe you set that up ahead of time. And again, being a good colleague, if you see somebody who's starting to veer into dangerous territory, maybe it's time to kind of take them aside.
It's a really bad place to tell someone you hate them or tell someone you love them.
Absolutely. If you're having those thoughts, pause, hold on to them, revisit them the next day.
And keep it close to your heart over Christmas.
Well, and it's also important, and we've seen a real shift over the years in terms of certainly employer-sponsored events tend to involve a lot less alcohol. And maybe it's an afternoon lunch somewhere. It's or it's more of a potluck. It's something that isn't going to encourage quite the excess that perhaps, you see again in the movies about the infamous Christmas parties.
Some have them really great. They have a good time, but they set some parameters ahead of time, like things like no social media.
Right, exactly. That's a great boundary to be able to set. And again, some larger employers are able to set things like saying, look, we'll take care of cabs for you. Or, if that's something you want to be enjoying, we'll help you with a discounted rate at the hotel. Something along those lines, which is great for large employers and good on them for being able to do that. And for smaller ones, it's setting some parameters. As you said, social media is a fantastic limit setting. What happens at the Christmas party does not show up on social media the next day.
And because you want to be able to go to work the next day and look your coworker in the eye, presumably, and hopefully it's not black.
Yikes! Yeah, no, for sure. No, but it is actually a good reminder in terms of for the whole season. We tend to, in the same way we do when we're off on holidays, it's the holiday calories don't count, or I can eat and drink and kind of do things that I wouldn't normally do because it's the holidays. Don't get me wrong. Enjoy whatever the holiday treats are, but be mindful of the fact that your diet is going to have changed a whole lot. It's often much richer, it's heavier, it's gotten a lot more fat. It's, even if it's just all the cheese plates and the cookies and the sweets. Making sure that you find some room for some fruits and vegetables in there. Making sure you've got some time. You probably aren't going to the gym on the same routine because normally that's something you do when you're going to work or back and forth. Making sure you're getting out and getting some exercise and keeping an eye on what's happening to your sleep. Because all of those are things that, again, are going to make us more vulnerable to getting sick and being susceptible to all of the other stressors that can add up on us over the holidays.
And an extra set of hands in the preparation and the cleanup.
Oh, wouldn't that be nice? That's important.
I have to say, my husband's very good at the cleanup. Very good at the cleanup.
You have him well trained.
Yes, absolutely. He's not going to like hearing that, though. Include meaningful activities.
Yeah, again, we get caught up in sometimes the true holiday excess and we forget, or we get caught up on, I need to find the perfect gift for this person and I need to be spending and spending and spending. And how about let's step back and go, what is actually really important about the holidays? One of my favorite phrases that I use, I never ask a kid, what are you hoping to get from Santa? I ask, what are you looking forward to doing over the holidays? Because if you ask a kid, what did they remember most from last Christmas? It's not going to be the toy. It's not going to be some big object. It's going to be, hey, remember when mom was pulling the pie out of the oven and it fell and the dog got into it and tried to eat it? It's going to be the activities. It's going to be the events. It's going to be the memories. It's the, hey, you know what? We went ice skating out on the loop and we had hot chocolate and that was really fun.
Or I helped decorate the tree or, the little things like that.
Yeah, and remembering what the whole season is supposed to be about, which is time with loved ones, whether that's family by blood, whether that's family by choice. It's celebrating those that do surround us and making sure that we remember that that's the focus, that it's not all on the materialism and the consumerism and the excess. And then, of course, figuring out some ways that you can include some charity or some giving and as part of the season as well.
So we've been talking a lot about people who are planning and plotting and enjoying Christmas, but there are groups, more vulnerable groups, for whom Christmas is a little bit more stressful, and we'll delve into that a little bit right after this.
Great.
And we're back. Dial a Carol, December the 1st. Now, if you want something that's going to really get you in the Christmas spirit, tune in for that. And it's always for a good cause. So make sure you're tuned in to VOCM on Sunday, December the 1st. I can't wait, personally. Dr. Janine Hubbard with the Psychology Association, thank you very much, is our in-studio guest. And we were talking a little bit about some of the stresses and expectations that come with the holiday season. And that's when, now is the time when people are starting to think about this. It's only a month away, and I don't mean to stress people out about that. But there are people who are more vulnerable when it comes to Christmas time. And the first ones that come in my mind are the recently bereaved or the bereaved, period.
Absolutely. There's always we always look for milestone events, and certainly anyone for whom this is their first holiday season without a loved one, it is going to trigger all kinds of memories of past years, of past events. But as you sort of said, it's something that, you know what, even it could be 20, 30, 40 years later, it's still one of those key points in the year that triggers the, remember how much they love this, or they would have really enjoyed this, or it triggers memories of our loved ones who aren't with us anymore. One of the reasons is Christmas in particular, but any of the holidays that come up with this season are so steeped in traditions. They're the things that we do year after year after year. And suddenly not having a participant who was an instrumental part of those traditions year after year, it's a real adjustment. And for some people, it works to let's change traditions completely. Let's start some new ones, because returning to the old ones is too painful. And particularly the first year of bereavement, that's a lot of families find that really helpful. Maybe that's a good year to go and spend Christmas at somebody else's house, not be in whatever the familiar environment is for you, because those memories are so challenging.
Well, that was my question to you, because we all know somebody who is bereaved or recently bereaved, and you want to include them in, how do you reach out? How do you, some people might say, oh, well, I don't want to add to their stress, but sometimes they like...
The best thing you can do is put out an open, no pressure invitation. And it's very much the, hey, not sure how you're going to be feeling about the holidays this year. You can let me know the morning of, because they may not know what they're going to want or what their needs are going to be. So have a little bit of extra food ready and literally have it be a no pressure. I'd love to have you join us if you'd like to, but no worries if that's not what's going to meet your needs today or on that day. Because those feelings are going to fluctuate up and down and up and down. And again, some people may do the opposite of what I was just suggesting. Some people may cling on to the previous traditions and really honor them and almost re-emphasize them or bring out additional ones that they haven't done in a while, because that's a way to help them connect to their loved one. And so there's no right or wrong way to do it, but it's really important, if you know somebody who is newly bereaved this year, reach out to them and just let them know, look, no pressure. If you need a change of pace, if you want to come over anytime, if you just want to come over for a cup of tea, doesn't have to be on the day of, it can anytime over the holidays, leave it open-ended, but also make sure to let them know that it's no pressure if they're not feeling up to it.
One of my favorite things at Christmas are Christmas decorations.
Yes.
I just love them. And I like to give Christmas decorations, and I love to get Christmas decorations. And so my entire tree is Christmas decorations that somebody has given me. And every Christmas, they go in a box.
Yep.
They're there for the whole year. But every year at Christmas, when I take these out, I know exactly who gave me each one and why. And sometimes it's very personal. It's a cute little, it's a cat or something. You know what I mean? It's something very specific, or
it might be something more symbolic, and it might be something that does momentarily make you kind of sad while you're pulling it out. And that's the other thing, is it's okay to be sad while remembering loved ones. That's an important piece. If they hadn't been meaningful to us, we wouldn't be sad thinking about the fact that they're not with us. So embrace that. That's okay. Again, that becomes an important part of the tradition.
Indeed, and like I say, there's some that I have that people who are passed on, and I'm sad for a moment, and then I put it up proudly on a part of the tree so that I'm remembering them.
Absolutely. And I know a lot of people who part of their Christmas Eve or Christmas Day tradition is a visit to the cemetery to, put a poinsettia or put a wreath, or again, it's a way of including, your lost loved one as part of the event.
What about families that have gone through a marital breakdown and there's youngsters involved and that gets more difficult? How do you approach those type of situations?
Again, the first year is the hardest. Hopefully it starts to get a little bit easier over time. But there's a couple things. First of all, it's really complicated, and you do have people who've gone through a different kind of bereavement and a different kind of loss. Being mindful that finances often look very different. You may not have as much money to be spending on things. Setting down some rules, like now is the time, if you haven't done it already, with the ex-partner in terms of how are we handling Christmas with the kids? How are we handling gifts? Because this is navigating new territory. And please don't try to buy your child's affection with large Christmas gifts, especially if you know that your ex-spouse is struggling. This is not the time to try to win the popularity contest. In the long run, kids figure that out pretty quickly.
But also, where do the kids spend their Christmas?
Well, exactly. And it's
how
figuring
do they
out
spend their
those
Christmas?
new traditions, and depending on distance. I mean, a lot of people, again, depending on the kid's age, one does Christmas Eve, one does Christmas morning or Christmas Day. So we have some families who just celebrate Christmas a day early or a day late. And that, and they just turn that into this is how we're going to celebrate it. If families are at a further distance, so there may need to be some travel over the holidays, again, that's going to take some navigation and some negotiation. But making sure the kids know that they are going to get to celebrate Christmas with both of their parents. It might look a little different this year, but the celebrations are going to be there. And again, that's when you pull back on those traditions and say, absolutely, all the things that we always did, we're still going to do. It might happen on a different day. And sometimes I use the analogy of, hey, remember the year when we all got the stomach flu? And actually, we celebrated Christmas on the 6th of January because no one was well enough to do anything until then. And you know what? We did okay.
What about the whole notion of two Christmases, if you know what I'm saying? We'll do Christmas at Mom's and then we're going to go do Christmas at Dad's. Is that a fair thing to do? Because, sometimes you hear kids in the school saying, I had two Christmases this year.
Sure. Well, and again, a lot of kids have multiple Christmases. They have Christmas at home, and then they have Christmas at Nan's, and then they have Christmas at other Nan's. And that part's okay. Again, it's just making sure that the plans are clear cut. Because biggest worry kids will have leading into Christmas is Santa going to be able to find me? How is Santa going to know where I am? And you can reassure them Santa knows both of your houses, and Santa is going to visit with something at both of the houses. Santa's a pretty smart dude.
Oh, absolutely. He's magic after all. What about for those without close family ties or social networks? How do you reach out to them or make them know that, they're welcome, or how do they cope when they're all alone?
Yeah, and again, part of it depends on how important the holidays are to individuals. Honestly, and again, we get really hyped up, and I love Christmas. Don't get me wrong; it's one of my favorite times of the year. It's not a big deal for a lot of people, and we also want to make sure we're not imposing all of our, enthusiasm and making them feel guilty because they're not worried that they're missing it. Especially take a look around. Do you know any recent immigrants? Do you know any international students? Do you know somebody who's just moved here from elsewhere in the country and, maybe isn't going to be able to afford to go and visit with their family? Again, reach out. A lot of times people will include them in maybe Christmas Day is really treasured and is kind of for your immediate family. Well, maybe you have an open house on Boxing Day or on Christmas Eve, something where it would be really easy for additional people to come in. And also some almost everybody in your network has somebody who's doing what I kind of call an orphan's Christmas, where you have people who are either new or don't have a lot of family, and everybody kind of chips in and does a potluck, and those can often be really fun and really interesting. So making sure, just kind of reach out with some of those offers if you know of things. And also, listen, the International Society at the university is always looking for host families. If you think it'd be interesting to have a bit of international flair at your celebration this year, just reach out to them.
That's an excellent idea, actually. There's other issues surrounding Christmas that some children have difficulty with, and I'm thinking of the 3 A's, if you will,
Yep.
autism, ADHD, and anxiety.
Absolutely.
How do we design our Christmases around those kinds of special needs?
Well, some of it is going back to that early thing we talked about around expectations. This is a prime period for flare-ups of all 3 of those issues. We're being mindful that, again, our kids are likely to be overtired. Our kids are likely to be overstimulated. They're really excited. But that can also lead to a lot of meltdowns. That can also lead to struggles and frustrations. And again, especially if we have this unrealistic, you will look picture perfect in your perfect, holiday ensemble, and you won't spill anything on it, and you will pose for all the photos, and you will be perfectly behaved. Listen, that's unrealistic to expect for any kid, let alone a kid who has additional challenges. So being mindful, what are the noise sensitivities? What are even in terms of the Christmas clothing, sometimes putting on a hot, itchy sweater for that photo is enough to put somebody over the edge. The change in routine can really set a lot of people off. The lack of predictability, especially either for kids with anxiety or kids with autism. Well, actually, you're right, all 3 of the A's. Not having the same kind of daily structure and routine can really throw you off. I was telling you before we came on air, anxiety flares up in really interesting ways. We put this pressure on kids that, well, if you're not good, Santa's not going to come. Well, if you have a kid with anxiety, that doesn't help motivate their behavior. In fact, that can often paralyze their behavior. And we discover we have kids who are up all night because, I said something mean to my brother today, and now Santa's not going to come. And it accelerates. But also, some of this increases some of the typical fears. Really common fear in a lot of kids is, well, somebody's going to break into my house. Well, we suddenly have a holiday that is structured around a large, strange man breaking into your house. And so working with them a little bit around, well, if this is a concern, are there some alternate ways we can do things? I had a family one year where we wrote a letter to Santa. And we put it on the door. We mailed it and we put it on the door to make sure that Santa knew to do his delivery, not inside the house, but to the back porch. That was nice and enclosed. And that helped to reduce a huge amount of anxiety and had the kid going back to sleep.
It strikes me as you're talking to, we have these pictures with Santa.
Yes.
And I personally, I don't know, it gives me some kind of weird pleasure. I personally love to see the pictures of the youngsters absolutely flipping out on Santa's lap.
That's because they're not your youngsters.
That's because
and
they're
you're
not
having
mine.
to pick up the pieces afterwards.
That's exactly right. But I think we've all been there at
Yep.
some point in our lives. And there's, a point where children in their development are afraid of strangers, and that's cool. And you, of course, then you look at somebody who has this big beard and all you can see is 2 sets of eyes. And, it becomes rather freaky, I guess. But how do you deal with children who are afraid about sitting on Santa's lap or even going close to Santa?
Sure. And again, some of it's working on it ahead of time, walking them through what to expect, explaining, again, just how magical Santa is, but also making sure that, again, what are your expectations? And are they unrealistic? Your kid doesn't have to sit on Santa's lap. Maybe your child is standing in front of Santa. Maybe they're sitting, I don't know if you've seen, most of the Santas now have benches for exactly that reason. Maybe it's just they're sitting on the floor looking up at Santa. It's okay. We have this picture perfect idea in our mind, but you're quite right. Years later, the ones that we enjoy far more are well, that's who my kid was. And the year they were 3, they were absolutely terrified of Santa. And it's also okay if they're really terrified. Do we really need a picture? Maybe they can just
Exactly.
watch.
And of course, this is the time of year too, and we're almost up to a break, but I wanted to make this point as well, or get you to make a point about this, is that this is the time of year when you're going to be seeing people you don't see very frequently. What are the expectations for a child when, oh, go give Aunt Edna a kiss now? You haven't seen her in 14 years.
Yeah.
What, is that a realistic thing
Well,
to do?
and it's a tricky balance because we are working so hard these days to teach our kids about personal space and personal boundaries, and how they, respect their bodies, respect themselves, what their personal boundaries in space are, and knowing for your child what that comfort is. Some kids are happy going up and giving a hug to almost anyone. Others, that's something that's reserved for just the very closest members of the family. And so teaching them an alternative, whether it's giving a high five, whether it's working on a handshake, something that they can do. Now, it's really hard, though, for some of the older relatives to accept that. And so sometimes it may even be having a conversation ahead of time and saying, you know what, my son's working on some personal space and he likes to get to know people a little bit more. I know you think you know him because you've seen all the pictures, but just give him a little bit of time. And maybe by the time we leave, he'll be ready to give you a hug.
Dr. Janine Hubbard with the Psychology Association of Newfoundland and Labrador, my special in-studio guest, talking about Christmas preparations and stress. We'll be back right after this. And we're back. We're talking about some of the Christmas stresses and ways to recognize in yourself, I suppose, what you're capable of and what you're not capable of, especially during the holiday season when the expectations go beyond yours. They go to other people's expectations of you as well. It's almost like a 12-day wedding or something.
That's actually a pretty good description of it.
Dr. Janine Hubbard with the Psychology Association is my in-studio guest. And it struck me earlier while you were talking, and we were talking about some of these things, that the time of year, there's always food laid out. It's always the exact wrong things for you to be eating, but it's oh so good. And it's all about the indulgences and the feasting, I guess. That must be really difficult for anybody who is either, one, struggling with their weight, or two, struggling with an eating disorder.
Absolutely. And you're quite right. This is a time period where we focus on eating. We also focus a lot on drinking. So again, anyone who has issues with substance abuse or is recovering, especially from alcohol addiction, this is a really tricky time of year. So some of it is being mindful of the people in your life. And so sometimes it's focusing and coming up with some activities that have nothing to do with eating and drinking. Maybe it's hey, you know what? I really want to go snowshoeing out in the woods, assuming we have some snow by then. Or maybe it's I want to go ice skating. I want to go out for a cup of coffee. Something that's away from kind of the focus and the excess. So being mindful of the people who are around. If it is something that you yourself are struggling with, again, this is a really good time to perhaps reconnect with your therapist if that's something you haven't been, haven't had the need for. This is a high vulnerable time, so it's a time to perhaps just boost up some of your supports. It's also okay to be really honest with the people around you and say, you know what, I'm going to find being around this kind of food really challenging this time of year. Can we do something else? Or plan when if you're in charge of bringing some food, making sure that there is a balance. Make sure there's a veggie tray in there somewhere. Make sure there's a fruit platter. Make sure that there are some things that we all, quite frankly, should be having to balance out some of the excess.
On the much darker side
Yep.
of things, and I know this through working in the media, is that police and shelters will tell you this is the worst time of year when it comes to violence. And it's usually around Christmas and it's usually around New Year's.
Right.
For anybody who knows that that's a reality that they could be facing, this has got to be a really dreadful time of year.
Yeah. And again, I come back to our earlier comment about, while it's great to celebrate the holidays, end of the day, you need to be protecting yourself and making sure that you are safe. And whether that's making sure you have an escape plan in place, or whether you are someone who you know that this is a period of time where you're more vulnerable. So like I say, whether reconnecting, if you currently have a therapist, making sure you're reaching out to one of the crisis lines, making sure you're reaching out and knowing that you are not alone through this time period, that there are supportive services available 24/7 throughout the holiday time, and do not be afraid to reach out.
And of course, the victims in the most cases are women, and they're the ones that are trying to keep this together.
And trying desperately to hold on to control of things and make it, again, picture perfect. You want to make it picture perfect for the kids. But sometimes you need to, like I say, don't worry about the picture perfect, worry about safe. I'd far rather have someone who wasn't able to celebrate the holidays this year, but is alive and safe to do it next year.
Absolutely. Eating, drinking, sleeping, you touched on that before. We all get out of our school routines. We all get out of our work routines. Some people are saying, wow, I'm glad I'm going back so I can get a break. Yeah. How do we keep that in check?
So much easier said than done. Some of it is, again, being mindful. Some of it's limiting the number of parties and activities you're going to. As we said, there's only so much excess you can enjoy before your body says, whoa, I've had enough. I'm shutting down. It's a high time of year for a lot of illnesses and bugs to be floating around. So you're already susceptible. So even if you're looking at, let's say you're off for the 2-week time period, looking at just what do I have scheduled and making sure that you have a lot of downtime. You have time where it's you know what? Maybe let's deliberately buy a puzzle that we're going to work on over the holidays so that it's almost we have this activity that's quiet and low key that we're going to do. Make sure you're stocking up on some non-holiday foods and drinks. I'm a big fan of, again, just stock up on some of those veggie trays and those fruit trays. If you're feeling exhausted, that's at least a quick way. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to prepare. You could just grab yourself a handful, and you're not feeling the need to be preparing a great big meal. But you're still keeping up with some healthy eating.
And it's good for you.
Absolutely. Well, there's that. And watching the alcohol consumption as well, because unfortunately, as much as we like to joke that holiday calories don't count, I'll be back in January to talk to you about keeping your New Year's resolutions. And the more we veer off over the holidays, the harder it is come January. Same with our finances. The excess that we do in December, we wind up having to pay for it in January. So sometimes thinking of it that way helps to kind of equate the balance of I am still going to have to pay the consequences of this.
Well, I had Jason Hilliard on a couple of weeks ago talking about that very notion from the Canadian Chartered Accountants Association. And he was indicating that, try to keep a budget, stick to it if you can, and try to avoid credit card debt.
As much as you can. And actually, when we come back to that whole, like I say, my big theme for today has been the watch your expectations. We get caught in these traps of these traditions over the years, and we get caught up in this need to provide a gift for every single person in our social network. Again, think about, is this someone for whom you want to provide a token? Maybe it's a card, maybe it's a little bit of home baking versus the who do I really want to acknowledge with a gift, but also does it have to be an over-the-top gift? Really checking expectations. I know amongst my social network, we've really moved over the last few years to things like a Secret Santa. So as opposed to coming with a gift for every one of the 20 people in that group, come with one gift and come up with some really fun party games, like some pass the parcel kind of things, or some gift swap ideas where you go home having laughed, having had a really silly time, because it's not about the gift. End of the day, you find something fun. Listen, I used to do a tacky gift party, which was the favorite party of the whole year. It wasn't about the monetary value of the gift. It was the belly laughs that came out of it. So think about, what are you trying to get out of the activity, not what are you giving?
We used to have a pass the parcel in a little group of friends I had that we used to get together regularly. And man, we used to have a hoot with that.
Absolutely. Listen, I've had far more fun, and I can tell you far more of the memories from those kind of parties. So really rethink that even amongst your friends. And it's also okay. Now is the time to reach out to some of your friends and family and say, look, things are a little tight for us this year. How would you feel if instead of our traditional gift swap, we did a pass the parcel? Or maybe, we can still do something for the kids, but amongst the adults, how about we do something different this year? It's a hard conversation to initiate, but it's a vitally important one. And you may be surprised at how many other people in your network are then saying, oh, thank heavens, I feel the same way, but I was afraid to raise it.
And that's usually the response is, whew, thank you.
Yeah. You very rarely have people go, but I really wanted to spend all this money.
Really wanted to spend a lot of money on you this year. Yeah.
You're just not going to find that.
No, that's right. Dr. Janine Hubbard, thank you once again. This has become sort of a regular on our show, but I do appreciate it. We always find interesting themes to explore at various times of the year. So I do appreciate that. We'll see you again now in the new year when we talk a little bit about these
New Year's resolutions.
New Year's resolutions and the year ahead and all of those expectations we set on ourselves. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk, funny we have this mozzie weather right now, we're going to be talking to the Arthritis Association about some of the suffering that people go through in this kind of weather and elsewhere. We'll be back tomorrow at 1, so stay tuned for that.